at the 2022 Eye2Eye International Film Festival. And with great respect and great gratitude, we have the pleasure of having 4 wonderful local artists come up and share their creative, their poetry, to underline and highlight the theme of this year's festival, What Unites Us. And for this portion, I'd like to invite my colleague, Ilaria Ritchie from the Eye2Eye Film Festival Committee to moderate and introduce our artists today. Ilaria.
Thank you very much, Mark. What a wonderful collection of films that we just saw. It's so inspiring, and I'm so pleased to be able to introduce to you our very own Cobourg's Poet Laureate, Jessica Outram. Jessica is a Métis writer, and by day she also works as the principal of Indigenous Education for Kawartha District Pine Ridge School. Please do join me in giving her a wonderful welcome.
Hi everyone. Wow, what a film. It's hard to come up here after watching something like that. I feel I need to just soak that in for a moment. Today I'm going to read for you a poem called The Story of the Sash. I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario with roots in the Georgian Bay Métis community. And this is the sash. I thought it would just be helpful to bring it here to show you, just in case you've not seen one before. And it was worn by voyageurs during the fur trade, and it has become a symbol that unites distinct historic Métis communities all across Canada. The other reason I really wanted to choose this poem for today around the theme of what unites us is that it's also National Indigenous History Month. The story of the sash. She began with each thread, finger-weaving stories, fights on red roads seeped down into ancestral webs, plants and trees grown for ceremony, an abundance of green. Gold resilience glistened on generations later born again and names reclaimed. Blue spirits sang and danced, all families welcomed to their fish fry. She lit white sky candles to feed the longing to understand. And when the black shadow of loss pierced their homes, her fingers counted everything taken. Come back, Métis and Anishinaabe mothers. Braid your knowledge into these waterways. Stitch this land that cries out for healing. Bind these stories with your distinction. This sash an offering for every gift and sacrifice. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you, Jessica. That was beautiful. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Wally Keeler, and he is a poet and also a poetician, founder and director of the glorious Imagination of the People's Republic of Poetry, has mixed technology, performance, and poetry together in an unbridled act of creativity. Please join me in welcoming Wally to our stage.
It was a joy to see those young people on there with their strength and their vitality that they had. And I've lived decades into poetry, and I recognize all of that stuff. I had a body with strength that I put into poetry and exercised it in the public domain. But you go through life, the body decays, the heart and the mind prevails. And I wanted to present a poem of what unites us. And the thing that always united me was freedom. And I put my freedom on the line so I could go over behind the Iron Curtain and assist dissidents and poets and artists there as well. So the poem is called Freedom, Freiheit, Svoboda, Liberté. Whatever else, poetry is freedom. Irving Layton. Lo and behold, it is true. Resist and revolt, write and rewrite, Shelley and Whitman, Ginsberg and Mayakovsky, all the turbulent tongues of poets singing, howling, screaming for freedom from wasteland to homeland to poemlands throughout the glorious united imaginations. Freedom, Freiheit, Svoboda, Liberté in every tongue is worth all the blood it takes to prevail. Wild animals do not do well in captivity. Creativity is wild and disruptive and exhilarating. It flourishes in freedom. Humans always flee towards freedom. Ever notice that? Censorship causes more social damage than free speech. You ever notice that? Dictatorships fear free speech. Ever notice that? Freedom is secured by free speech, a sustainable decongestant against the SORE virus, suppression, oppression, repression of expression. The SORE virus is the leading cause of mediocrity and chronic boredom. Countless numbers of humans die of boredom every year. Free speech, serving progress since the Enlightenment. Thank you.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Wally. That was very powerful. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Ted Adamson. He's a poet and former photojournalist for Northumberland Today and Cobourg's former poet laureate. Please join me in welcoming Ted.
So I sort of struggled with this poem because I wanted to write something that sort of connected me with the sentiment you saw in the movie, and myself as a senior poet, somebody who has written poetry for 50 years, and who's done it for no other reason than I can't control myself. This is called Tap Dancing to Elusiveness. Writing in circles, thoughts leading nowhere, seeing only surfaces in the mirror of my life. Later, feeling as if someone's life depended on me, I moved the keyboard closer. In the fluttering darkness, torn from the wind during a waking up moment, when the best of me was a sense of something unknowable, an energy of otherness caused by that which knows more than I held my heart, and I understood. Your song, their chant, our challenge, that turns magma into angels and psalms, puts steel in the backbone of words, transforms wounded thought into healthy sermons of non-compliance, a voice for all but owned by none, the shape of singing in the cadence of hope that many cannot understand but all hear, are talking in social codes that reveals the true prompt, the ever-present absence of proof that tells us why we are here. Yesterday, I took blocks of air and twisted them into words. I took potential and crafted possibility. So much of what I do is speaking to myself, thinking others are listening. Tap dancing to elusiveness. It's an arrangement of self that autographs my existence, tattoos my blood upon the skin of the present. At the depths where you and I have no difference, there's only the sound of our breathing. We're meant to talk in poetry, an elegant stumble that finds the expected ill-prepared, meant to cause the world to fall down into words. Truth is the absence of options. Our speaking, standing bravely, chanting defiantly, shares the truth of us too many are afraid to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. That was very thought-provoking. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Katie Hoogendam. Katie is a writer, a poet, and interdisciplinary artist. Former incarnations include high school English teacher, homeschool educator, and radio host and producer. Please join me in welcoming Katie.
Thanks so much for having me. I need to watch this movie about 10 more times. And thinking about the theme, what unites us, I was taken back to the idea of isolation that we've experienced over the past 3 years. And I think this movie really gets at the heart of the idea that what is most intimate is our yearning to survive and to survive in community. This is a poem I wrote just a few months ago. There I stood, thawing. I woke in a fright last night to what sounded like a chorus of icicles breaking all at once, over and over, outside my bedroom window. And though I may be frozen lately, hypothermic and the dark night of the soul and all that, there certainly are no icicles yet. It's still mid-November, the hills surrounding, not yet white, still umber, maybe ochre. In the dark, color is hard to remember. Pushing aside leaden blankets, I got up. And you know what? It was the wind, pushing a dried stalk of goldenrod through the tines of a rusted windmill, lawn ornament left by the last tenant. Through shadows, I observed these itinerant artists disguised as inanimate, making music for no audience, which did not lessen the thrill of something mysterious and potent, the energy of touch upon sound. In the midnight front yard where I stood, miniaturized amidst thick emerald boughs, tremendous evergreens, tops scraping the indigo sky, where I stood under a moon like an egg, my feet naked and wet on the sleeping grass. You'd think they'd be frozen, ice, but instead, there I stood, thawing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Katie, for taking us into many different places in that piece. Next, I'm going to invite all of our poets up to the stage as we are going to just have a little bit of a question and talk about poetry. So please join me in having everyone or having them return to the stage for our discussion period. So I have several questions, and you can just jump in wherever you feel like you have an answer for me. My first question would be, do you have a favorite poet or a favorite poem? Wally, please feel free to answer if you want.
The poem I just read was the poem I had written just for this event, as a matter of fact. Many of the lines I've written over the years, and I montaged them. Part of the idea of poetry was freedom, and it introduced me to other poets, especially in other languages and in other nations. And, geez, there's a nice bright light. I feel like I'm in an interrogation right here. But I always felt that freedom is the fire I always wanted to play with. And it does burn, it scorches, it's dangerous, it's exhilarating, it's everything you could ever imagine. And I lived my life in freedom from day one to this. And there were many hurdles and challenges, but that's part of life. And poetry gave me the opportunity to articulate so many things, and poetry gave me the opportunity to hear other poets and the richness of language, the eloquence of things. And those kids in that film are all vital verbs. Not one of them is a noun. And I would advise you to live like a verb, because that's what you are. It's innate that you are a verb. And poetry, just all the metaphors and analogies and similes, that's it for me.
Thank you.
I don't have a favorite poet because I'm in awe of so many poets. As for a favorite poem, I just like reading poetry aloud, so that's what I do.
Thank you.
Other people's poetry.
Oh, are we all answering?
You don't all have to answer. If you feel like you want to jump in there, feel free.
Okay. I hate this question because every time I ask it to myself, I can't answer it. I think two poets that I've been thinking a lot about over the past couple of months are Jim Harrison. I'm from northern Michigan originally, but happily transplanted here, and he is from that region, and he sort of speaks in my home tongue, I guess. And so I read him when I want to be reminded of where I come from. And I think what I've loved about continuing to dive more and more deeply into poetry is that sometimes the people that speak to us are totally unknown, right? Like maybe the woman on the bus was my favorite poet today.
Yeah.
And I think that's the magic of this art form. You don't have to commit to a 600-page novel to find something that speaks to your heart.
I've been spending a lot of time with Emily Dickinson lately, and I find every time I read one of her poems, I'm seeing something I didn't notice before. There's a complexity and a simplicity happening all at once in each of them that I really enjoy, and I think about the life that she lived and the size of her world versus the size of the scope of her poetry, and I think we all have access to that, right? We have access to everyday moments. We have access to looking out our windows, to what's in our hearts, and all of those things. And so her poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers, inspired the title of my latest poetry collection called The Thing with Feathers.
Thank you. That actually brings me right to my next question, which was, what is the spark or inspiration that motivates you to write a new poem?
Shall we maybe make our way back this way? Wow. Well, sometimes it's as poet laureate, sometimes you're invited to write a poem for an event. So sometimes it's just like an assignment. And so then you find your way into the story, into that, and look for something that connects to your experience of that, because I find I never really want to speak on behalf of anybody else. I just want to kind of look at it through my own lens as a start, and then hope that somehow maybe that will connect to how other people are thinking and feeling too. But I find it can also be something really simple. So one of the poems in The Thing with Feathers that's actually got that title, The Thing with Feathers, was about an experience that I had early on in the pandemic. I was going for a walk, and as I'm leaving my house, I have a big tree out in front of the house, and I saw something down at the base of the tree, and I looked at it, and I thought, wow, that is the most beautiful flower I think I have ever seen. And it was like the dead top to a flower. And I thought, is that a lily? I don't know what that is. I've never seen anything quite like that. And then I walk down to the lake, and as I'm walking, I'm thinking about this beautiful flower, and it's just kind of haunting me and stuck with me. And so when I return back, for some reason, I feel compelled to go look at it again, and I get a stick and I turn it over, and it has a beak. And it wasn't a flower after all. So I find when you have moments like that, whether you're looking at your own life or you're looking at something that you encounter on your path that has a subtext you didn't notice, I find that there's something interesting there that you then want to dive in and explore.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I think you got right to the heart of that. I love that story. That stuck with me the first time I heard it. I think that's what it is for me too. It's detail and surprise. I think often in life it's really easy, and it's an easy equation for despair to think that the world is either this thing or that thing, and it's not usually. There's usually a third way, tertium quid or whatever. And that, for me, is what keeps me going in life. And it's the details of that. Like, oh, what a beautiful flower. I'm going to go back and look at it. No, it's a dead bird. And in that, I'm like, thank God I'm wrong so often. Because that's where the poetry comes from. It's thinking I knew something about something and then realizing I know nothing over and over and over again. I wake up and realize how little I know. And I'm so thankful for that. And I think that's, where poetry comes from for me.
I started writing poetry, excuse me, because I was so befluxed or whatever by university sentences that stacking words on top of each other was fun. But out of that, I started to play with words because I could express my aggravation, I could express my sense of humor, I could play with language. And as I developed, I started, have various soapboxes I wanted to get on. I wanted to lecture people. But now that I'm older, there is no plan. Something will be floating in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I want to put some words down, and I don't know what the words mean or where they're going. I'll put the words down because they sound so great, and I like the flow of my language. And then I'll write something, and I'll take it to the poetry group, and it's only partially worked out. And I'll have to explain myself and say, I'm sorry, you're only getting part of the story here. But then I'll work on it and keep crafting it, and then I will understand what that feeling was. It was blowing through the kitchen, and I'll have words for it. And all of a sudden I have a poem.
Oh, you hang on to that one.
Yeah, I already answered your question in that regard. I didn't answer the first one, so I will now. It went over my head.
That's okay.
There were three poets that had the major deal on me, and that was Leonard Cohen, Irving Layton, and Margaret Atwood. And I was a teenager when I bought 2 books of poetry of Irving Layton and Leonard Cohen. And I loved Leonard Cohen for the sensuousness and the romance and the tenderness and the sweetness of his poetry. But Irving Layton was the one that rocked my soul because he was tough and he was strong and he was raw. And these are the people. I got into poetry so that I could meet these people. I wanted to be with these people and to hear them up close. I wanted to be invited to dinner and into their homes, and I eventually was. And I would refer to Margaret Atwood because we had a bit of a relationship. At one time in my life, I was under an arson attack and I lost everything. And stuff was thrown out the window of the apartment building that I was in, and one of the things I found on the ground was her book of poems, all burnt around the edges, several other books. And I tore the page off that book and I mailed it to her. I forgot what I said, but I did not expect this. About 2 weeks later, there was a big package in the mail. She had sent me every book she had ever published at that date, all signed and everything, to come back. And she knew the People's Republic of Poetry, and I met her down at Harborfront backstage, and we talked, and I told her that there was a poem she had read at this human rights conference I was at, and it just made me feel so internal. And she went out on the stage again, and I was there, and she read that poem, and the poem went, "You fit into me like a hook in an eye, in a fish's eye."
Thank you, that was incredible.
Yeah.
And I'll have one last question here, which is, where do you see the future of poetry going?
Me?
You can start if you like, yeah.
Oh, I know where I'd like it to go. I knew where I went to explore it when I went to Loyalist College of Technology in 1972, and I took communications arts. And that was television and radio and photography and all of that sort of stuff. And the only thing that wasn't included in the course was data processing. And I don't know for what reason I decided that computers had something to say. And so I took the class, and it was all a business class. They were all there to do it for business purposes. And my teacher at that time, we were still friends. He phoned me yesterday. We were in contact for months. I was the exception to his rule of all business students. I'm wondering, well, what the hell are you going to do with computers? I'm not entirely sure yet. I haven't learned enough. But it seemed to be that that was where I was going to go. And I did contact, and I read some computer poetry, and it was blah, because algorithms could not be creative. The computer is a tool. It will not do it by itself. It only does what you instruct it to do. And I used the computer. It was a big, with all the mainframes and stuff in those days. Now I got it in my hand. And I think it's all going that, and you saw these kids using their cell phones, using their technology, and it was magic to see. And they were more adept at using that than my decades of using all of the other things that I always aspired to. So they're going to carry it up. We were born in the analog era and went into digital. Now they were born in the digital world. This is all they know. A page of paper doesn't crash, but a cell phone can. So you've got interesting things to deal with. And that's where I'd like to see it going.
Thank you.
As long as there's language, there's going to be poetry. When we were young, there was no slam poetry. And when the slam poets are old, there'll be a whole new form of poetry. It'll continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think poetry in general is experiencing a kind of renaissance, and maybe that's because we seem to be very aware that we're living in a historical moment. And it's very interesting to see that, poet laureates across at least the Western world, everywhere really, are getting more recognition as leaders and as speakers for the public, kind of the voice of the public. But also, I think, in particular, Cobourg is really a weird and wonderful place to be a poet. It's shocking to, I don't know about your experience, but I've lived in other places, and it's not, this is rare, the inclusivity of our community and the joy with which I think we celebrate poetry. I think, a lot of people in the past have had this sense of poetry as this ivory tower elitist thing that has to be purposefully difficult to understand. And that's the opposite of true, right? Poetry is the intimate experience of being human, and you're trying to communicate that. And so I think in particular in Cobourg, I won't speak for the world, but poetry has an interesting future because people are adapting that form to their own. We've taken that form in our community and are sort of expanding it with the variety of folks. We are 4 people representing 4 different styles of writing, but we are legion. There are many, many more of us, and I think that's really cool.
Me too.
Just to build on what some of the others have said, 12 years ago I moved to Cobourg because of the writing community. I had visited and done a little talk at the Spirit of the Hills writing group, and then I went out for lunch after and sat in downtown Cobourg in one of the patios and went, oh my God, I could live here, and this writing community. And so then, ended up getting a job out this way and moved, and here I am. So we are really blessed to live in such an incredible community that is just bursting with all of the arts. Writing is just one of the many arts. And this festival this weekend is again another testament to the rich culture and artistic presence that we have in Cobourg. And I find with working full time, it's really tough to keep up with just even being a participant and an attendee of all of the wonderful things that are happening, because I would just like to go to them all. So I feel like I'm getting ready for retirement. Although I've got some years to go, I'm really excited about having more time to be able to engage more full-heartedly in everything that's offered, because there's just so much that's here. In terms of the future of poetry's always got a story. You know, if we look at the history of humanity and the place of story and language, it's always been there, but it seems to ebb and flow like everything else. And we're in an exciting time where I think there's a light on poetry that wasn't there for a long time, and that people are paying attention in ways that maybe they haven't. And maybe it's the presence of laureates and towns like Cobourg who decide that that's important. Our neighboring towns, Brighton and the city of Peterborough, have also just added new poet laureates to their communities. The Ontario has a new poet laureate, Randall J., who's incredibly talented, and he's a spoken word artist, like many of the ones in the film. And as is the poet laureate of Peterborough, is also a spoken word artist. So you're seeing more spoken word being raised up and a light shined on there. And I think that to me that inspires me, because we're hearing voices that maybe we haven't heard before, that have been traditionally silenced. We are kind of moving into a time where we want to understand different perspectives, and poetry offers us that access point to move in and go, okay, let me listen to what your experience is of this or that or today, or a theme like what unites us. So the future of poetry looks really great, at least I think for the next few decades, because I feel like we're at the beginning of something, right? We're at the beginning of a change, and so that's an exciting place to be. So thank you.
Well, please do join me in thanking all of these wonderful poets for sharing their hearts and their art with us today. Thank you so much.